and I can't hear you.
Okay. Can you now hear me?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I've got
Okay.
you now. Yes, sorry about that.
No,
And I owe you an apology for showing up late. We set our clocks back this weekend in the US, and my calendar did not sync correctly. So I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
no, it's no problem. I thought I was doing some mistake because I heard that you change your time now. Okay, this weekend I heard that. So I was confused about it. It was here 10 a.m. here or 11 a.m. So I tried to
It
go
is the
10 a.m.
worst
but
thing that we do. I don't know why we do it. It just throws everybody off, and this is
yeah.
the second time in 2 days that I've had this problem. So I'm sorry about that.
No, no problem, no problem. Anyway, thank you for your attention because, let's introduce myself. I am a geologist. I work in a IPT. It's a government company in São Paulo state in Brazil. And I work with geophysical applied for engineering on water covered areas, lakes, rivers, and near shore. And so I'm very close to SBGF, our association for geophysics in Brazil, so I watched that meeting. I was surprised because usually we don't have meeting talking about that matter in Brazil. So I got so surprised about the meeting, and I also got surprised because most of the guys there talked about effect of seismic on mammals and so on, but always talk about low frequency gas and oil. Of course, is where most of the activities happen. So I got curious. I just sent an email to you because I see you are very close to this matter. So I sent an email just to know a little bit more about how high frequencies do for mammals. That's the point. I work. I'm firing all the time. So people. I also give classes to students sometimes. Last week I stayed 1 week talking about shallow geophysical investigation for the guys from the Federal University of South of Brazil, Santa Catarina State. And always students ask me about, well, what about your sound sources on animals, mammals, and so on. Of course, I read something in the Congress, but not so deeply as I could listen in this meeting you are talking about. But anyway, no one talks about high frequency, so means no problem to fire with high frequency. That's could mean that's the point. Thank you for your attention to go ahead in this talk. So
Yeah, I appreciate you reaching out because it's a challenging issue for sure. And the issue often is that, there are people who are very well versed in the geophysics and there are people who are very well versed in the biology, and the overlap is kind of missing. And so, if you know what happens through the water, maybe you don't know what happens once it goes through the seafloor and the other way. So I grabbed a couple of figures that I think will help kind of illustrate this. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully. All right, are you able to see that?
Yes.
Perfect. Oh, is that not showing up correctly?
Do you work also with this kind of experiments? I mean, high frequencies effects on mammals. Is this part of our job too, or will mainly go on low frequency? I mean, gas and oil research.
Well, I'll show you in just a second here. I think some of the basics of marine mammal hearing are kind of important in context. I'm sorry, my screens are not showing up correctly. We'll just go from here. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I think one of the most important things to note, first of all, is just the hearing capabilities of different animals. And so this is a graph showing where animals have their best sensitivity of hearing. So you can see the mysticetes, these are your large baleen whales, have very good low frequency hearing, whereas the odontocetes, your toothed whales, your dolphins, have much more sensitive high frequency hearing, and same for the pinnipeds, the seals and sea lions. And then they also have humans in here as a reference point. You can see humans generally have better low frequency hearing, but underwater, of course, the human ear is not well adapted to hear well, so it's much less sensitive than some of the other species. So these are the criteria that the U.S. uses for where injury may occur. And you can see for the low frequency cetaceans, they're looking at a sound pressure level of about 230 decibels. And that's kind of the same for mid and high frequency cetaceans. Pinnipeds, slightly lower in water, and then in air, we don't really need to worry about here. But this would be an injury criteria. So that would be a permanent threshold shift where you're losing some of your hearing capability permanently over at that part of your range where the sound frequency is present. So that's very uncommon because you do need to be exposed to the sound for quite some time. And actually, they haven't even been able to induce PTS in a laboratory setting with marine animals. So it's not something that we expect to happen, but these are the proposed criteria that the United States uses. And then here are the behavioral response criteria. So you can see slightly lower. This is where we would expect to see the animals respond in some way to that sound. So either they're moving away from it or maybe they're startled. It's not necessarily that reaction is going to be biologically important or harmful or detrimental in any way. It's just some sort of response would be elicited. For the compressed air sources, so this is your typical seismic survey array, you can see the output is very dependent on the configuration of the array. I'm sure you know all of this. So most of the energy is directed downward. And there's less out to the sides, and this is all going to be dependent on how the array is configured. But I think it's important to note, too, that the nominal source level that we use for geophysics is not ever really present in the environment. I think that's something that trips people up when they say, okay, the output is 262 decibels, when in reality, by the time you've come to that far field point where those sounds converge, you've had transmission loss already acting on that signal. So I think that's an important thing that I like to point out to people. And then again, the majority of the sound energy is below 100 hertz with those seismic survey arrays. And this is just kind of a top view that I think is helpful, where you can see how the energy is really concentrated directly below the array and then lower levels out to the sides away from it. This is another figure from one of our members that I think is a really nice illustration. So they've put in the injury criteria level and the behavioral response criteria, and this is the distance from the center of the source. And this is where I get a little bit bent out of shape when we talk about having 1,000-meter exclusion zones, because you can see we're below those criteria within about 50 meters in both cases. So 500 meters has become kind of the industry standard. It's a good precautionary measure, but there really is no benefit to extending it further than that. And again, this is just for the low frequency sources. So here's a figure kind of showing some of the distance to the array, their distance to those thresholds from the array for some of these higher frequency sources. So I pulled this from a National Marine Fisheries Service in the U.S. Ruling. This was for a wind farm survey. So you can see this is the distance to where you would expect to see the injury happen. It's less than 1 meter in most cases, except for these very high frequency cetaceans, things like porpoises, maybe out to 35, 40 meters. And again, this is sustained sound. This is not for a single signal. It's not you have instant permanent threshold shift at 35 meters if an animal happens to be there. And then again, for behavioral responses, within about 150 meters is where you'd expect that to drop off. And so this is why we don't really talk too much about high frequency sources, because again, these sources are highly directional. The majority of the energy is directly below whatever that piece of equipment might be. But also because transmission loss acts so quickly in the water on those higher frequencies, we have even less concern there, because lower frequencies can propagate long distances, especially at depth in cold water. But in surface waters especially, and when we're talking about higher frequencies where that transmission loss happens more quickly, we really don't have a lot of concerns about, definitely not injury, and even not really behavioral response, except for some very specific species that are very sensitive in that high frequency range. And so there are really, there's two groups within this odontocetes that they've kind of lumped together here. There's a mid-frequency and a high-frequency group. Your high frequency group would be things like porpoises that are very sensitive up in the upper portion of this range, whereas your dolphins will be kind of more down here. But again, between the sensitivity being so limited and then the transmission loss happening so quickly with those high frequencies, that's why we don't talk a whole lot about these higher frequency sources. Our concern when we talk about seismic is usually these low frequencies and the large whales that are more sensitive to those low frequencies.
Alex, I'm not specialized in this matter, so maybe it's a basic question for you, and sorry for that, but I'm just curious. When you mean any damage to the animals, you mean physical damage, but don't you also study if for example, the seismic source cannot damage actually physically the animal, but the animal can miss the direction of his home, its home like that, and means the whale can go to shallow water and die. Consequently, after some high frequency sound, for example, this is part of our study, or just physically destroying ear or like that? It's my curiosity.
No, that's a good question. So when we talk about injury in the context of this, we're talking specifically about hearing loss. So that would mean, you're losing some of your hearing sensitivity in a specific portion of your range. It's not that you can't hear anything anymore. It's just that maybe you're a little bit less sensitive in the range where that sound was present. I think the other important thing with seismic survey signals is because they're impulsive and there's lots of time between each of those pulses, we don't see any evidence to suggest that animals become disoriented or confused, because like I said, the distance at which they would even expect a behavioral response is so low, and so animals will generally they'll turn away or they'll move away if they find it disruptive. So we're not expecting to see any sort of disorientation. And I think it gets a little bit confusing in the literature because mid-frequency active sonar, like the naval sonars that they use, has been shown to cause some disorientation in a couple of species. So it's been really beaked whales that are very sensitive at those frequencies, where mid-frequency active sonar has caused them to become disoriented. And there are a couple documented cases in the literature showing that those surveys were the likely cause of those strandings, but that's not the case with seismic. We haven't seen any evidence to suggest that the animals become disoriented, or we haven't found stranded animals with patterns of hearing loss that are consistent with what, a seismic survey would be. But I think the important thing to remember too is that there's always noise in the ocean. It's never silent. It's never quiet. There's always ships moving. There's things coming and going. And so these animals are, especially in urban areas where there's a lot of traffic, these animals are very accustomed to having stimuli in their environment, and they're constantly kind of responding to that. So we haven't seen that happen with the seismic sources, either the low frequency air guns or the higher frequency sources. I think mid-frequency active sonar is the only case where I've seen strong evidence to suggest that there's a correlation. And that's so specialized. That's not something that the average civilian is going to be able to get their hands on.
Yeah. I was surveying a big river in Amazon area. So I did 100 seismic profile crossing the river, and at some moment I decided to leave the boat, make the seismic profile, and I took a small boat and I went to an island, maybe 5 kilometers, a little bit more from the boat. And when I jumped to water, I got myself completely surprised about how clear it was for me the sound coming from the ship there firing. A side gun, chirp, and a boomer working simultaneously. I was but maybe 6 or 7 kilometers in the water, swimming, and I got myself so surprised about how clear I could hear the sound coming from the ship. I said, oh my God, maybe the mammals around me is disturbing in some way, because the sound was arriving in my ears was very strong. So when I saw the meeting, SBGF meeting, I got a little bit more curious about to know a little bit more about this matter. That's good. Nice to know. Nice to know your speech about this matter. Very nice.
Yeah, it's a tricky question because every individual is going to be different. No two animals are going to respond exactly the same way. What might be disruptive for one might be, a non-issue to the other. And the other consideration too is it's going to be really dependent on the state that that animal is in when they encounter the sound. So if they're really hungry, they haven't eaten in a day, and there's a school of fish there, odds on, there's not going to be much of a response because they're foraging. This is an important activity. If they're, maybe just traveling somewhere with their calf, maybe they're more likely to redirect. So again, it's been really difficult. It's been a question that, people have been working on in earnest for the last at least probably 15 years, trying to figure out where that point is where animals respond to certain sounds. And we haven't really gotten much closer to answering that question because it is so dependent on the individual. And so the best we can really do is we manage populations. We don't manage individuals. And so our goal is to never have an impact on a population, because trying to implement that on an individual level, and that's where it gets down to this question of mitigation measures, right? So you can implement mitigation measures in the field to avoid disrupting individuals, like that 500-meter shutdown radius.
Yes.
But some of the planning pieces come in when we're talking on the population scale. So if there's a known, breeding ground where all of the animals are going to be present, we try and avoid that area if we can, or, try and keep the survey as brief as possible. So it really is just down to managing those risks and mitigating them as much as possible. Because of course they're going to notice, right? They're going to hear these sounds. They're going to respond to these sounds. But our goal is to make sure that we never have any sort of impact on a population and to individuals as well, if it's possible.
Yeah. We ourselves, we listen a lot of sound and they're still alive. We ourselves, so the animals maybe has some way to live between these different sounds. Are you by the way, are you planning to present any article? Because we are now in the running, SBGF is running the International Congress of Geophysics. Have you?
They are. I think they have a meeting coming up this week, actually, but it's all in Portuguese.
No,
and so
I don't know, because there is I don't think it's only in Portuguese, because it's an international congress. So I saw some people presenting articles in English, and there is a simultaneous translation. It's an international meeting, actually. So.
Oh, maybe it's just the follow-up workshop to the previous session that we had. So I know that one's all going to be in Portuguese, and unfortunately, my Portuguese is limited to being polite, and we can talk about animals or food, but that's about all I've got.
But your name, your Loureiro, means something like Portuguese or Spanish, isn't it?
So my husband's family is from Portugal.
From Portugal.
So I married into it.
I saw so Loureiro means something from Portugal or Brazil or Spanish, maybe. It's,
I think I threw a lot of people off when I started speaking in English at that session.
Very interesting. Good, very good. So you must speak something in Portuguese.
I said, I can be polite, and I can order food, and we can talk about like animals or the weather, but that's about the limit. I've been trying to learn, because my mother-in-law claims she doesn't speak very good English, but she does.
Good. Have you been in Brazil in time, or no? Not yet.
No, I was actually. So this workshop was originally supposed to be in April of 2020. So I was supposed to be down in Rio for that, but then it got canceled at the last minute. So hopefully someday.
Good. Your company is working in our world, establishing rules and like that. It's EAGC. It's the main office is in Houston.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm based in Houston, and the rest of most of my coworkers are here. We do have a consultant down in Argentina, but we have member companies that are in Brazil and operate in Brazil. So we have a fair amount of interaction with the regulator, and we do try and get down there when we can. Unfortunately, the timing didn't work out with the pandemic starting and travel kind of being canceled and restricted across the board. So hopefully within the next year or so, we'll be able to get down there.
Good. Very good. Well, thank you very much for your talk, your explanations, almost personal explanation.
I hope that's helpful, because like I said, it's one of those things that comes up from time to time, and there's a lot of spin put on this question sometimes, because if you're opposed to oil and gas exploration, then it's really easy to oppose seismic, because it's the gateway to oil and gas development. And when we talk about some of these higher frequency sources, I think some of the nuance gets lost and it all gets treated as it's just seismic.
Yeah.
And so it's encouraging to see that, there are still people curious and asking questions. So I appreciate you reaching out.
I remember I went to a congress a few years ago in the north of Brazil, and there were two guys there, and I saw in the program of the meeting some guys were planning to talk about this matter. So I went to the presentation, but the guy there was just a guy fighting against the seismic companies, and his talk, it was no any fundamentals, scientific fundamentals. Just talk about, oh, you are killing whales, you are killing. Well, not. I was in a congress, but the guys didn't present any data. Actually, it's just talking against companies, side companies.
Yeah.
So I like it very much. The talk from SBGF, which you participated, was because I saw some numbers, some real data. So
exactly what it really is. It's a question of physics and it's a question of biology.
Yeah.
And you hear a lot of these sensationalist claims like that seismic sounds can propagate thousands of kilometers, and that is true. But that happens in these SOFAR channels in the deep ocean where animals can't reach. And so if the receiver can't hear it, it's not a biologically important problem.
Yes.
And there's a lot lost. And so I remind people that, look, I'm a marine biologist by background. I stayed in school till I was 27 to get a PhD in marine biology. If this were killing animals, I would not work here. I would not do this. It really is. It's important to me that our members are operating in the most environmentally sustainable way. And so it's, we're, as far as I know, we're the only trade association that has a full-time biologist on staff to answer those questions when they come up, because there's a lot of misinformation and there are not a lot of people that exist in this space between the physics and the biology to be able to answer those questions. So you get the crazy claims and then, nobody wants to put numbers on it to push back.
Yeah, that's the point. Very nice. Thank you very much, Alex, for your explanation and your talk. Yes, I hope you can.
My pleasure. It was great to meet you, and I'm sorry again for the confusion on the time.
No problem. I also was confused about the time because I heard about the change there and here and so on. I got confused too. No problem. Very good. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay.
Yeah, my pleasure. I hope you'll stay in touch.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a good
much.
one.
Have
Bye.
a nice time. Bye bye.